Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today on Grammaticus Books, we're talking about The Black Company. The Black Company by Glen Cook, first published in 1984 with the eponymously titled The Black Company. This book here actually collects the first three novels in that series, known as the Books of the North or the White Rose Arc. I just finished the first one, The Black Company, and I'm here to talk about it today on the channel. Now, like I said, this was originally published in 1984. It's a fairly popular series of books. It was popular within the military as well. It was very popular among military personnel who enjoyed these books, and there's a reason for that I'll get to here in a minute. I just recently discovered him. I had never heard of Glen Cook. I'd never heard of The Black Company until approximately a year ago when a coworker, whose book this is a loaner, told me about this book here, this company, Glen Cook, and says, you've got to read these books, The Black Company. And then Joseph Reads Books over on his BookTube channel, not that long ago, started talking about Glen Cook as well. And he was raving about what a great author he was with his Black Company series and Glen Cook's science fiction series as well. So I'm like, you know what? I've got to check this author out. I'm going to start this series, this grimdark sword and sorcery fantasy series, The Black Company, and see what it's like. But while I was waiting to get a hold of this book, while my coworker was trying to find it to give it to me, in the meantime, in order to start as a primer on Glen Cook, I checked out the book, The Best of Glen Cook, which is a collection of 18 of his short stories. And I started reading the first three short stories. I got through the first three short stories and novellas, and The Best of Glen Cook, and it was bad. It was not good. I DNF'd it. I DNF'd it because it was very grim. Imagine that, a guy who is known for his grimdark sword and sorcery fantasy series was writing grim short stories in his Best of Glen Cook collection of short stories. It was very grim, but the main characters in it, in addition to that, they were very unattractive. They were very unappealing. They were not characters that you could identify with, that you wanted to read about, who were likable at all. And then on top of that, which in my opinion was the fatal flaw, the nail in the coffin for this book when I DNF'd it, it was full of exposition. There was one story that I read in there that it was at least 80% exposition. Then they went here and did this. Then this happened. Then they traveled to here and this happened. And then these people over here did these things. That was 80% of the story. I just couldn't take it. I DNF'd it. So when I finally got my hands on this book here and I started in on the first story, The Black Company, the first novel, it wasn't without a certain amount of trepidation. And I'm glad to say that my expectations were subverted because my expectations were not high and it was actually good. It was a good, solid novel. And I can see why it's popular with people, and I can see why it's popular with military people in particular. Now, Glen Cook was a military guy. He served in the United States Navy, good on him, from 1962 to 1972. And during a portion of that, he was attached to a Marine Recon unit. Just before that Marine Recon unit deployed out to Vietnam. And then his end of active duty service obligation was up and he rotated out of the Navy at that point and out of the military. But you can tell that his military experience is imprinted very deeply here in this first novel, and I'm sure in the other novels, which is why it's popular among military guys. He has a very brusque, short style of writing. It's very clipped, but it's very effective. And everybody in his novel here has a nickname, just like in the military. There's not a single person here who you find out what their real actual name is. They all have nicknames. Croaker, One-Eyed Goblin, Silent, Raven, the Lieutenant, the Captain, the Lady, the Limper, Soul Catcher. That's everybody's names. You never find out what anybody's real name is. And The Black Company, the story is about a company of mercenaries called the Black Company, here in this eponymously titled first novel. And they will fight for whoever pays their contract. They're loyal to their contract, but they don't care who they fight for. If you hire them, whether you're the most evil person in the world or the best person, they're going to fight for you regardless. And they've been employed here in the first book by the Lady. And the Lady is the epitome of evil in this fantasy world that Glen Cook has created. She is an evil necromancer whose top 10 lieutenants who organize and direct her armies are known as the 10 who are taken, who are these resurrected corpses that she's taken out of the earth and are powerful necromancers themselves. And they're fighting against the rebels, and the rebels are the people who have risen up against her oppression, except that the rebels are being led by people who are sorcerers and are every bit as bad as the lady. They're every bit as evil as this evil personality, the lady, who is just the epitome of blackness in this world. So you've got evil people fighting evil people. And what I like about it is that the company, at least in the first 2/3 of this book, the Black Company, it starts off and it's basically focused on their little segment of this battle between the lady and the rebels. And you get the feeling that they're just a small cog in this huge war front that is going on, with all of these pieces moving on and going on about them like it would be in a real war. And they would be fighting their section of the war, and they're having victories in their small part of it, but they have to retreat because they're losing the battles on these other large fronts. And it reminded me greatly of reading about the German Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front of World War II, where the Wehrmacht is being retreated back by the Russian forces, the Stalinist forces, that is just this unstoppable tidal wave of steel. And then every now and then the Wehrmacht would turn around and just savage the Red Army. But it didn't matter because the Red Army could just replace those losses, or they would have a strategic supply line cut, and they just continually had to retreat back. And that sort of mimics the start of the book here, with the Black Company playing a small part in this war. That changes towards the latter part of the book and the last third of it, where they become more and more involved in the strategic part of it, and more involved with the lady herself and the 10 who are taken, her 10 lieutenants who direct her armies. And then you get drawn into the storyline and the story arc, which starts to develop in here, which is very good. You can also see in here with the Croaker, and I should talk about the Croaker. I've jumped over him. The Croaker is the main protagonist here in the stories by Glen Cook. He is the sole person through whose eyes you see the narrative of the story. Everything is written through his eyes, and he's not your typical fantasy hero. He is the chronicler, the analyst of the Black Company. He keeps records of their histories. And this book here, the series of it, is the history of about 40 years of the Black Company, with the Croaker keeping those records. And Croaker is also the physician who goes out and applies battlefield dressings to the people who are wounded in battle and tends to them when they're sick, if they come down with the flu or whatever. He is the medic for the Black Company, and you're viewing everything through his eyes. And this, I think, is a self-insert for Glen Cook. Glen Cook was in the Navy for 10 years, and he was attached to a Marine recon unit for a portion of that. And the only people who I know who are in the Navy who wind up getting attached to Marines are Navy corpsmen. So I think Glen Cook, I am fairly certain of it, Glen Cook was a Navy corpsman who was attached to a Marine recon unit as that Marine recon unit's medic. And that has been the inspiration for Glen Cook and his writing here in the Black Company. And you see a lot of stories here, a lot of little vignettes of things that happened to the Black Company, to its members when they're out in the town, going out into the taverns drinking, that I think are probably things that actually happened to this Marine recon unit with Glen Cook in it, that he's lifted from real life and put directly into the novel, which is one of the reasons why it reads so well and it reads so authentically for military personnel, military personalities, and how these personalities interact when they've been with each other for long periods of time. And it's what makes it realistic and gives it that appeal that military people like and non-military people like, because it has that ring of authenticity. And I'll give you one example of that. At the start of the book, a number of the Black Company are out in a tavern. They're drinking heavily, as military people tend to do in their off time. And they're very drunk. They are 3 sheets to the wind when they decide to call it a night. And they get up and start heading for the door. And the bartender, the bar mistress, the bar waitress, what is the word that I want? Their lady bartender. We're just going to stick with that one. Their lady bartender cuts them off at the door and tells them they can't leave yet because they haven't paid for their last round of drinks. The bartender, the tavern owner, has directed her to do this, thinking that they're so drunk that he can cheat them out of one more round, paying for one more round of drinks that they actually have already paid for, but he thinks that they're so drunk that they won't remember. And of course, they're not that drunk. They remember that they have actually paid for this last round. And of course, it kicks off a giant tavern brawl. And I'm telling you, that is something that happened with Glen Cook when he was out with his Marine recon guys, out in Olongapo or Pusan or Osan, somewhere over in the Far East. Sounds exactly like something that would actually happen, that did happen, and wound up getting transported here by Glen Cook and written into the book. And it's one of the reasons why it reads so well and why people like it so well. It is very much grimdark. It is a grimdark fantasy world. It's written very well. And the other thing that I liked about this, well, one, there's very little exposition. Every now and then he will drop into that tendency to start using exposition, but it's few and far between, thank goodness. And the other thing I liked is that he incorporates sorcery into his wars, into this battle for control of this fantasy world that he's created. And it works at the strategic level with the lady and her top 10 lieutenants using this sorcery on a strategic level to shape the battlefield. But it's also used at the tactical level because the Black Company itself employs what I would call hedge wizards, minor wizards who they use in order to help give them slight battlefield advantages to divine out where an enemy might be laying an ambush. And he uses those hedge wizards to great effect here in the story to give it an extra dimension of sword and sorcery fantasy that you really don't get anywhere else. And it gives it a nice, neat avenue to go down that has not really been explored in sword and sorcery fantasy before, of having tactical battlefield wizards at like a hedge wizard level, a minor wizard levels, affecting their spells and using their spells in order to help a small unit in small unit combat. And a lot of it focuses on the small unit combat, but as it gets towards the last third of the book, as I said, that starts to morph into them having a larger role in the larger aspect and strategic aspect of this conflict that he's outlining here in the book. And they start to get involved with the lady directly, their employer. And it's a very good novel. It was a very enjoyable novel. I was happy to have my expectations subverted. I'm looking forward to reading the other two in the series here of The White Rose and finishing that arc up. And I do recommend it. Now, if you haven't read Glen Cook before, I would highly advise that you go out and get yourself a library copy before you spend any of your hard-earned money yourself. Check out a library copy of the first issue, the first novel here, The Black Company. And if you like it, then you can go ahead and spend your money on it. But as always, when I'm recommending a new author, I do recommend that you use your library and make use of that resource. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up saying that I did enjoy this quite a bit. I'm glad that people recommended it. Check out Joseph Reed's books where he talks about Glen Cook over on his channel as well. And if you've read Glen Cook and have an opinion on him, please put it down in the comments section below. I would love to hear your thoughts on The Black Company. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up and say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.